Are you energized? Are you relaxed? Yeah. So we're going to spend the afternoon talking about post-merger integration. Before the break, before lunch, I shared this slide with you. We were talking about strategic alliances, and I introduced the idea of a successful transaction, inter-firm collaboration transaction, is more of a balancing act. There are pluses and minuses to going with an alliance. There are pluses and minuses going with an acquisition. Neither of them are assured to yield results. And there are innumerable factors that we just have to weigh ourselves through as we proceed along the transaction. In acquisitions, though, I think there is a fundamental idea that we should always test against whatever we're doing during integration. And that's this notion of the acquisition premium. Okay, so I want to take a step back, just a little bit of finance here. Be sure we're all on the same page. If I think about combining two firms, Firm A and Firm B, and I'm going to pay, and I'm going to assume that the value of those two firms combined is greater than the sum of them individually, which, by the way, if I'm going to pay a premium for the target, is a necessary assumption for me to make. Everybody on board with that? Okay. Then that assumption also means that I believe there are economies of scale, economies of scope to be had when I combine these two organizations, right? Now, those economies of scope could be economies of scale, but they might also arise through other activities in the value chain. An economies of scope is basically the value of doing two activities together is greater than doing those activities separately. A few years ago, Procter & Gamble bought Gillette. Anybody have a background in these types of products, consumer products? You used to work there. At which, P&G or Gillette?
What happened was I used to work for advertising agency working for Gillette. And Gillette was to P&G. That's when I moved to P&G.
Oh, okay. So you lived in this during this merger. So how would you describe at least in theory, when they agreed to merge, the planned economies of scope arising from that transaction?
What they explained to us, I don't know if that was really a truth, but what I've known is that from P&G's point of view, having a bigger portfolio is always better because when they negotiate with their customers, i.e. drugstores or supermarket, the more product they have, they can leverage their economy of scale and get better deal or get a shelf space. So that's where they're coming from. From Gillette point, they also said getting a male segment is more important for P&G because P&G used to have female segment only, especially focusing on housewives, but they wanted to expand that to male segment to fully support customers' life. So that's where they are coming from. From Gillette point of view, because they only had razor and blade, also brown products, which is electric shavers and electric appliances, their negotiation power wasn't that strong. And for them, it made sense to go into this merger because they can use P&G's negotiation power to get better shelf space, get a bigger visibility in the shop, and have a bigger marketing activities.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. So the expectation was that the revenues that could be generated from the razor business, the Gillette business, all else equal, would be higher if it were owned by Procter & Gamble than if it were independently owned. And that incremental difference, added value, is the economies of scope, one of them, the economies of scope in this transaction. Saori also mentioned economies of scale because that I could get through my distribution network. If I'm driving to this particular supermarket anyway with my truck full of goods, I might as well add on some razor blades. The marginal cost of doing that is close to zero. And so I drive down the unit cost of delivering all of the products, okay? So there's the strategic logic of that particular transaction. And you can imagine if we were a group, if we were members of Procter & Gamble's finance department, we could sit around over the course of a day, a week, a month, and model these potential economies of scope. We could understand the incremental cash flows over the foreseeable future. We could apply our weighted average cost of capital, right? Making some assumptions about beta, about risk of this transaction and whatnot. And we could come up with a discounted cash flow, today's net present value, right? And that number should represent the maximum premium I'm willing to pay for Gillette. Does that make sense? How many of you have heard that communication is key in the post-merger? And Caroline, hello. How are you today? Why?
Communication, because you have to communicate through the different layers of the company, communicate the overall strategy, how the new merged entity is going to be functioning, what are the bodies that are going to be kept or not, and why. It also helps to actually motivate the teams that are working on the ground, because I think a lack of communication can build anxiety, and then people get paralyzed by their fright.
Okay, good.
Yes, and even more than anxiety, people start speculating a lot.
The rumor mill
goes around. It's very tough.
Becomes very dysfunctional, right? I have to spend time correcting the misperceptions. Jane?
To add on to that is really to manage people's expectations, because I think a lot of it stems from people expecting something else, but the end result was not what they thought it would be. And then that's where the company does not really function well.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah.
And on top of that, it's also the personal part. People are looking information about themselves, about their personal professional destiny. It's not only where organization will go, where I, as professional, will go. What would happen to me, to my function, to my job.
Yeah. You know, one thing I've noticed in what you've all said, and I agree with it, but I think that there's one piece missing. So far, we've talked about the reasons why the top needs to communicate to the bottom, right? Is that the only direction of communication? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if there is concern on the bottom and that the top is blind for because they haven't taken it into account, they might run into troubles without having a chance to counter-steer.
Okay, so how would we solve that problem?
Well, enabling communication from the bottom to the top.
Okay, so we want it to flow both ways. Is communication just talking? What are the aspects of communication? When you and I communicate, what happens? I talk. What do you do?
Exchange information. It's engaging. Both parties.
Yeah.
There's also listening.
You build trust and rapport?
Yeah, by listening, right? So the flow of information, this is really information. This is plans. This is what you can expect from the future. The other piece of communication that I think is really, really critical is this listening. One company I worked for had, I think I've got it on a slide coming up, what they called morning sessions, where they were held in the mornings, but they were talking about sessions in which employees could mourn their loss of identity, their loss of their colleagues who got laid off, their loss of the belief that the future would be stable, right? And a communication strategy this company used was creating space for employees to communicate about that. Yeah.
I witnessed the merger and acquisition of Merck Serono. And in that sense, it was Merck coming for lunch sessions to present their different business units to Serono. And in that sense, it was actually familiarizing them with the organization of both bodies and understanding the other person's business and what they're doing. Oh, this is interesting. Maybe I can get to utilize their capabilities in what I'm doing currently within my entity. And it was done little by little, but I think then they took, well, in that case, they took so much time to do it that then people got tired of it. And I think this comes back to your need for speed, where then there becomes this boredom of, oh, it's just another one of these sessions. And there was also a lack of communication, so people didn't know where it was going. But in the beginning, it was quite successful.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's and so think about communication. I think this is true in all contexts, but especially true in a merger integration context, as talking and listening. Yeah.
Also, the PepsiCo CEO.
I'm sorry?
The PepsiCo CEO.
Yeah.
Also uses.
Does he?
Does she?
She. Thank you. Gosh. Just take me out back and shoot me now. Yeah, so whenever you're going to communicate with another person, think about, what do I want them to think? How do I engage with them on an emotional level? And what am I asking them to do? And any communication has to have all three elements to be maximally effective. And so don't forget to engage the heart. Now, all of this nonsense about communication is so important because the #1 problem in post-merger integration is people problems. This is not a scientifically derived curve. This is me with the little thing on PowerPoint, okay? So take it as trends, not as specific data points. But we certainly observe that as time moves from rumor to integration planning to post-integration, that we see employee commitment fall and then recover as a mirror image of what's going on with employee stress. So a big chunk of what one needs to do during post-merger integration is dealing with that employee stress. So I want to ask you guys, and that is clearly what Megan is confronting in this case, right? So I want to just do a 5-minute buzz group. What's the problem? I mean, I know the problem. The problem is that the bank can't deliver currency to the right person in the right country on the right day. But what's the cause of the problem? And so in your buzz groups, talk about that. And you're Megan. What do? You're staring at this email. I don't want to hear about it. Your own, all of the incentives, the powerful incentives that you have are tied directly to the profits of this business. You don't have control over this back office. Customers are leaving. Salespeople are leaving. You can't control what goes on over there. And yet you've got to solve this problem. So how do you go about that? Okay? 5 minutes? We'll solve Megan's problem, then we'll take a break. And then you guys can go back over there. Okay.